I'm about to introduce to you Dr. Neil Percival OAM, Chaplain Southwest Slopes Zone, to talk on suicide awareness and prevention. Neil lives with his family in Young and works for the Anglican Church, Diocese of Canberra and Goulburn. In 2020, he was awarded a PhD for research on the impact of exposure to trauma. He has a special interest in the well-being of emergency service workers, having joined the New South Wales Rural Fire Service as a volunteer firefighter back in 1980. So over the last 40 years, he's been an active member of Westleigh, Beacon Hill, Broughton Vale and Boara Brigades, and has held most roles. He is currently a Deputy Group Captain in the Southwest Slopes Zone. He was the RFS Captain for the Shoalhaven District from 2003 to 2018 and became the Chaplain for Southwest Slopes Zone in 2018. In 2019, as a response to the high rates of suicide in rural New South Wales, Neil developed a suicide awareness and prevention program aimed at equipping RFS members with the knowledge and skills to recognise some of the warning signs of suicide in fellow members and give them the confidence to intervene. The program was rolled out through the Southwest Slopes Zone in 2019-2020 and has subsequently expanded into surrounding zones. Most impressively, Neil told me that if we go back to when he was in 5th grade at public school at the Normanhurst West Public School, he was very proud that he scored 100% in the public school's annual spelling bee. There we go. That's what he gets the applause for. He gets the applause for that, not all the other stuff. I'm sure you will appreciate hearing from Neil, and hopefully there will be no spelling errors in his PowerPoint slides. Let's see how we go. Please put your hands together and welcome Dr. Neil Percival, OAM.
Andrew is a very aggressive researcher in finding out things like that, and I have checked the PowerPoint very carefully to avoid embarrassment. So as Andrew said, my name's Neil Percival. I'm a volunteer firefighter, have been for some years now, currently in the Southwest Slope Zone, and also have worked as a volunteer chaplain for many years. My thanks to the RFSA for the opportunity to speak today on something that's very close to my heart. When I moved to the Southwest Slopes in 2018, I was not prepared for it, but confronted by the high levels of suicide in New South Wales to the west of the Sandstone Curtain, as opposed to life on the coast where this was far less of an issue. Suicide amongst members of our brigades, suicide amongst our communities. And I decided I needed to do what I could to make a difference in that area. And the result, I think, is a local strategy designed to address local issues. But as we've discovered over time, those local issues are shared across many areas. All of that began a 5-year journey that's brought me here today with the support of my zone manager and using my own senior leadership team as guinea pigs. I put together a program that I've now taken to most of the 60-odd brigades in our zone and more widely in other parts of the state. And I'm reminded of how important this is each time I turn up at a small RFS shed in the middle of nowhere and find 30 or 40 people packed in and waiting to hear about and have an opportunity to discuss this issue. I will say that this is the most luxurious shed I have yet attended, and the catering is better than any brigade I've been to. I withdraw that statement. What I will say is that even if one person benefits from this, then as far as I'm concerned, it's a good outcome. So I do want to thank you for giving me your time. As we talk about this problem that we all face, and I want to invite you to become a part of the solution. In fact, you already are part of the solution simply by being here and by listening to me, because I think that the solution is to embed as many people as possible in our brigades around the state who have some knowledge of the issues and some skills to help them intervene. And we already have over 1,000 who have been through this program and are scattered around the state, not just helping their brigades, but also the communities that those brigades are a part of. So I want today to give you some knowledge and equip you with a few basic skills that can help you to make a positive difference wherever you come from. Now, in this point in the program, I would normally spend a bit of time talking about confidentiality. I'm not going to do that today. I do take confidentiality very seriously, but I'm not actually going to ask you to disclose anything of a confidential nature. But I do also, at the start, usually talk about the fact that suicide has the potential to stir up some powerful emotions and bring to mind painful memories. And so can I say, if it does this for you, and if you need to take a break, step out, just do it. I will not take it personally if you get up and leave. So let me set all of this into a context. From an RFS perspective, what we train our volunteers to do from the beginning of their training, from BF onwards, is to prioritise firefighter safety. We talk about the need to watch one another's backs. We talk about situational awareness, about being aware of and alert to the hazards, knowing our escape routes, knowing our safety refuges and how we get there when things turn bad. Well, I want to talk about the threat posed by suicide in the same kind of a way. This is a genuine, life-threatening situation. But I think if we are watching each other's backs, if we are alert to the warning signs, if we know what to do when we see them, then we are in a place to make sure that everyone goes home safe. So that being said, what are my goals for today? Number one, simply to raise awareness about the whole issue of suicide, to further the conversation that's already going on within our organisation about mental health issues. Number two, to identify the risk factors that indicate who might be at greater risk of suicide. Number three, to identify or describe the warning signs that indicate someone might be considering suicide. Number four, to clear up some of the common myths and misconceptions about suicide. And then to give you some core skills that can help to save a life. And finally, to give you the confidence to use them. And I hope I can do all of that in the 40 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. I'm sure I can, because often I don't get that long. And the idea is simply to make the most of the time that is available. To do that, I'm actually using a program called QPR that has been adapted quite a lot by me. QPR is one of those, a widely used evidence-based program around the world. It's promoted by the Black Dog Institute in Australia for use with non-clinical first responders. And in my part of the world, health is managed by the Murrumbidgee Primary Health Network, and they particularly endorse this program. But my reasons for using it are, I guess, threefold. Number one, it's short, and I can't persuade RFS volunteers to give me a great period of time. Number two, it's simple, it's free of psychobabble. And number three, it is just practical. It boils down to three basic skills. And it's these things that my target audience seems to want. So I'm not going to tell you everything you might want to know about this subject. I won't be able to answer every question that you have, but hopefully I will leave you in a place to be able to make a difference. So the acronym QPR stands for Question, Persuade, Refer. And those three words are really the three core skills that can help to prevent suicide. And I'll unpack what those mean in just a few moments. But let me say what this is not. QPR is not intended to be some form of counselling or therapy. If anything, it's more like first aid. We understand the role of CPR in first aid to keep someone alive until the paramedics arrive. QPR is a bit like that. It's designed to keep someone safe until they can access the professional help that they need. Really, it is about planting the seeds of hope through positive action. What does that mean? Well, I'll unpack that over the next few minutes, but I guess in brief, planting the seeds of hope is about being present. It's about showing someone that they are not alone, that their life matters, that there are people who care what happens to them and want them to live. And giving hope is about giving other options. So let me move on by setting the context in which all this happens. In Australia in 2021, 3,144 people ended their lives by suicide. 9 people every day. That's the 2021 figures. I actually don't have the national figures yet for 2022, but I can tell you that in New South Wales makes up almost a third of those numbers. We're up to 3,340, thank you. New South Wales makes up nearly a third of the numbers, 964 in New South Wales in 2022. And that was up 5% on the year before. Approximately 65,000 Australians will make a suicide attempt every day, approximately 180 people. And every single attempt impacts not just the person involved, not just those closest to them, but the data suggests that 135 people are actually exposed to this event in a range of different ways. Of those 135, 53 will actually experience a degree of disruption in their life. 25 will experience a major disruption. 11 will experience quite devastating effects on their life. And these effects tend to be more pronounced in small, tight-knit communities where everyone knows everyone, where everyone is invested in each other's lives. A country town, a sports club, a school, an RFS brigade. Everyone is exposed. Everyone has to deal with this event, and there tends to be a greater proportion of major disruption. So let me move on to talk about some of the risk factors. Number one, age. Suicide is the leading cause of death for Australians aged between 15 and 44. It's the 15th most common cause of death in this country overall. Gender. 3/4 of those who die by suicide are men. Ethnicity. The suicide rate amongst Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is approximately twice that of non-Indigenous Australians. History of suicide. The risk increases when someone has previously attempted suicide and survived. The risk also increases for those who are close to that person. So I read one piece of research that suggested there's a 4-fold increase in risk for someone if one of their parents ended their life by suicide. Location plays a factor. And so the rate of suicide in rural Australia, the part where I live, is twice that of capital cities. Add to that occupation. The suicide risk is greater in certain occupations, and 2020 research found that the worst sector is actually the farming and agriculture sector. In New South Wales, the rate there is 1.6 times that of the general population. Combine that with location, and you can see that we have a great risk amongst our rural brigades. Explanations would include social isolation, economic stresses, the lack of access to available resources, easy access to lethal means. There's a whole range of reasons, I think, why the risk is higher. Actually, just recently came across another piece of research that suggested the risk is higher in those with fewer years of education. So it's actually 2.6 times higher for those with a maximum of secondary education as opposed to those with a tertiary degree. Sexual orientation. Amongst the LGBTIQA+ community, 42% considered at least the idea of suicide in the last 12 months and are 10 times more likely to actually make an attempt than the rest of the population. As a subset of occupation, I want to talk about emergency services, and Beyond Blue has done a lot of research into this area across all agencies. And what I've done is take their research and dig into it and extract just data that pertains to volunteer firefighters. So volunteer firefighters report experiencing high or very high levels of psychological distress at 1.5 times the rate of average Australian adults. Almost 1 in 3 fire brigade volunteers have reported being diagnosed with a mental health condition in their life, compared to 1 in 5 of all Australian adults. Fire brigade volunteers report suicidal thinking and planning at almost 2.5 times the rate of all Australian adults. 1 in 3 fire brigade volunteers report having experienced a traumatic event that deeply affected them during the course of their firefighting career. Now, I do need to stress that risk factors are not predictive. They don't mean that someone is going to attempt suicide. They don't indicate who that person might be. But what I do know is that in 2020, 90% of people who ended their life by suicide ticked on average 3 to 4 of those risk factors. I also know, looking at members in brigades that I have dealings with, that a lot of them can tick 6 or 7 of those boxes. As I say, these are not predictive, but they do tell us that we are an at-risk group, and therefore we need to be alert. We need to know what to look out for in those around us, and we need to know what to do if we see something of concern. And that, I think, is why I put this program together. So very briefly, some of the common myths and misconceptions about suicide. Number 1, no one can stop a suicide. If someone makes up their mind, it's inevitable. It's simply not true. If people in crisis get the help that they need, they might never be suicidal again. Number 2, asking a person about suicide will only make them angry and increase their risk of following through. Again, not true. Asking someone directly about their suicidal intent has been shown to lower anxiety, open up channels of communication, and reduce the risk of a self-destructive act. Now, going along with that one, and I haven't put it up, is a concern that some people have about putting the idea into someone's mind. But can I suggest, if you are that worried about someone, if you have seen signs in their behaviour, things that they've said that cause you to be concerned that they might be considering suicide, I can guarantee that they have already thought of it. You are not going to put an idea into their heads. Another myth: only experts can prevent suicide. Wrong. The people who prevent suicide are the people who are there at the time that help is needed. And this is everybody's business. Anyone can help to prevent the tragedy of suicide. Myth: people considering suicide keep their plans to themselves. Again, not the case. The vast majority of people considering suicide do communicate their intent to, it might be many people, it might be a few people, it might be one person, but they tend to communicate their intent somehow in the week preceding their attempt. Those who talk about suicide don't do it. I've just said those who are considering suicide generally communicate their intent. It's a step in the process. They may well go on to attempt or complete an act of self-destruction. Once a person decides to end their life, there is nothing anyone can do to stop them. Not true. Suicide is the single most preventable form of death. And the research shows that almost any positive action can help to save a life. So let me go on to talk about some of the clues or the warning signs that might give us an idea of what is going on in someone's head. As I said, people do communicate their intention in some way. They might do so using direct verbal clues, and these are all just direct quotes. I've decided to kill myself. I wish I were dead. I'm going to commit suicide. I'm going to end it all. If X, Y, or Z doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. They're fairly straightforward and direct. But the indicators might be indirect. Some examples. I'm tired of life. My family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyway? I just want out. I won't be around much longer. Pretty soon, you won't have to worry about me. On top of verbal clues, there are a whole range of behavioural clues. Now, this is a list, I'm afraid, that keeps growing all the time. So my list is certainly not exhaustive, but let me just run through some behavioural indicators. As I said earlier on, a previous suicide attempt is a behavioural indicator. Acquiring a gun, stockpiling pills, co-occurring depression, moodiness, or hopelessness. And when I talk about co-occurring, I'm talking about co-occurring alongside some of these other factors. Putting personal affairs in order, giving away prized possessions, a sudden interest in religion when there was never one before, or a disinterest in religion when there had been an interest. Drug or alcohol abuse or relapse after a period of recovery. Destructive acts. Unexplained anger, aggression, or irritability. Another one that I just read about recently that I haven't put on the slide is sleep deprivation or sleep disturbance. That is, an inability to get to sleep or to stay asleep. But all of these things are clues as to what might be going on in a person's mind. So we've got verbal clues, we've got behavioural clues, we've also got some situational clues or indicators. And these are really all situations that involve a significant loss. Some examples: being fired from a job or expelled from school or university, a recent unwanted move, loss of any major relationship, death of a child, spouse, best friend, especially if by suicide, diagnosis of a serious or terminal illness, the sudden or unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment, anticipated loss of financial security, loss of a valued support person, fear of becoming a burden to others, feeling embarrassed or humiliated in front of peers, being a victim of assault or bullying. I often think of these situational clues as being more like triggering events or a last straw, the thing that pushes a person over the edge. What I would say is that one warning sign might not mean anything. In fact, multiple warning signs might not mean anything. But every warning sign or every clue ought to be taken seriously. The more clues or signs observed, the greater the risk. And if unsure, if anything said or done is a suicide warning sign, apply QPR. I haven't told you what that means fully yet, but it's a way of finding out what is actually going on. But just before I tell you about those three tools of the QPR model, I do want to talk very briefly about social media. I'm never quite sure where to put it in my presentation. So this is where it's currently sitting, although it has moved around. Because people do communicate their intent within their social networks. But what is a social network in this day and age? At one point, friendships were defined and maintained by face-to-face contact, and we tended not to have all that many friends. But social media has changed that. So now we can have hundreds of friends, thousands of friends, some of whom we might never even have met face-to-face. Nonetheless, social media is a way that people disclose suicidal intent. Why do people do it? Well, one reason I think is just the relative safety of not having to look someone in the eye and speak to them, but there's a bit of distance involved, which gives a sense of safety. A second reason I think is familiarity. It's not my generation, I guess, but there are many generations who live their whole life on social media. Everything that happens is out there for the whole world to see. They're familiar with this as a means of communicating what is going on in their lives. And the third thing is the assumption that this is a sympathetic audience. The assumption that these so-called friends are actually interested in me, concerned about what is going on in my life. But that's just not the way that social media works. As a consequence, there are some big risks. The risk of not being taken seriously. And in fact, I remember reading the story told by one mother following the suicide of her 15-year-old son. And it was only after the event that she picked up his phone and was scrolling through it and saw that he had actually shared with a lot of friends his intention to end his life. And they responded by encouraging him to go on and do it. I don't think it was malicious. It was simply that they didn't think he was actually serious and the whole thing was a joke. Another risk is anonymity. Because again, if someone communicates something on social media, even if we're concerned and want to do something, we don't know where they are. In fact, we might not even know what their real name is. And then the third concept I'll add to that is a thing called diffusion of responsibility, which basically says the more people who know about something, the less personal responsibility any individual takes for acting on that knowledge. So if I was sitting down with someone face to face and they shared with me the fact that they were thinking about ending their life, I would be compelled to do something to help them. I would feel a burden of responsibility. But if that same piece of information is shared simultaneously with 1,000 people, it is so easy to think someone else will respond to that. Someone else is better equipped to deal with that situation. And so we don't feel any responsibility to act. And so there are all sorts of dangers that flow from disclosing suicidal intent on social media. What can I suggest? Well, all I can do is suggest that if someone expresses their intent on social media, treat it as real, like any other warning sign. Take it seriously. Tell them that you have heard. Tell them that you are listening and offer help in whatever way you can give it. And I'll suggest in a little while some other ways of doing that. So all of that brings me to 3 core skills that I want everyone to take away. 3 skills indicated by the QPR acronym, which stands for question, persuade, refer. We're in a situation where we have identified a person that we are concerned about, maybe something in their words or in their behaviour or in their situation that worries us. Maybe it's no more than a gut feeling. But does any of this mean anything? Perhaps it means nothing. Perhaps they are about to take action to end their life. Can we afford to ignore them? Well, we have to find out what is going on in their head. We have to know what these signs, these clues, these indicators actually mean, and the only way to do that is to ask. Hence the first core skill, question. Ask a question. Ask them how they are going. To my mind, this is actually the hardest of the three skills, particularly when it comes to asking someone if they are thinking of killing themselves, because we are so concerned about what that might mean for us. What will they think of us as a result? But remember, this is not about us. This is about them. And the purpose of asking a clarifying question is, I guess, twofold. Number one, to clarify the meaning of any signs or clues that we might have observed, but also to show that their message, their communication has been heard. It's a common theme in interviews of suicide survivors that they tried to tell people about what was going on for them, but they either weren't heard or they were ignored. Asking a question says, we are listening. We have heard you. We are taking you seriously. And as I said before, but I'll stress it again, asking about suicide does not encourage suicide. In fact, it might be the only thing that prevents it. So let's dig down into asking a question. We might broach the subject in an indirect manner. It's not my preferred way to go about it, but nonetheless, if this is the only way to ask, then do it. And here are just some examples of questions. Have you been unhappy lately? Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so unhappy lately you're thinking about ending your life? Do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? Just a way of probing what is going on in someone's thinking. We can also be more direct about it. Let me give you some examples. When people are as upset as you seem to be, they sometimes wish that they were dead. Are you feeling like that? You look pretty miserable. I wonder if you're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about killing yourself? Can I say, since embarking on this journey, I've found myself in the situation quite a few times where I've actually had to ask the question. Never gets easy. So all I do is take a deep breath and ask the shortest possible question, are you thinking about killing yourself? And I've done that multiple times, and I'm still surprised how often people will, in response to that question, say yes. I wonder if there's something about the shock of that direct and confrontational approach that generates an honest answer. But in the end, you've got to ask somehow. To find out what is going on in their heads, you have to ask a clarifying question. And I think it has to be clear, it has to be focused like those. I mean, there are plenty of ways not to ask the question or to get a no response. Let me just stick up a couple of examples. You're not thinking of killing yourself, are you? You wouldn't do anything stupid, would you? Suicide's a dumb idea. Surely you're not thinking about suicide. You're probably already thinking to yourself, well, I know why those are going to lead to a no answer. Because they imply straight away that we don't take this person seriously, that we don't value the situation that they find themselves in. We are not listening to or hearing what matters to them. And so, of course, they're just going to say no to make us go away because they don't take us seriously. As I said, asking the question is perhaps the hardest part of the whole process. But we just got to suck it up and do it sometimes. And if they say no and it's an honest answer, that's fine. Just back away. That's great. I was really worried about you, but I'm glad you're okay. And if at some point you do want to talk, I'm here. Leaving the door open for them to reach out to you if they need to. But if you are concerned about someone, don't wait. Ask the question. If you can't ask the question, if you can't bring yourself to do it, then find someone else who can. And this is the great thing about doing this in a group. There are a whole lot of people sitting here who have heard exactly the same information, who know the same stuff as you do. You can find one of them and do it together. If a person is reluctant to give an answer, either yes or no, or they're very evasive, then just keep on pushing. I would suggest doing it in private. If possible, people are reluctant to give honest answers when they think other people might be looking on or might overhear what's going on. But I think also once we embark on this course, we have to allow the person to talk freely about whatever's going on, and it might be something that takes a lot of time. So allow the time to do it. They are the one who matters. And I'd suggest having some resources handy, some phone numbers of important contacts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But really, how you ask the question is less important, that you ask in some way. So that's the first core skill, to ask a question. Core skill number 2 is to persuade. So we've identified a potential suicide threat. We've summoned up the courage to ask a question, and they have verbally acknowledged that this is something they are thinking about. Then core skill number 2 is to persuade them to take some positive action to get help, or get their permission for us to get them the help that they need. Now, I would say that this isn't all that hard to do, because most people considering suicide actually don't want to die, but rather they found themselves in a place in their life where they cannot see any other alternative. And so the key to persuasion is simply giving options, giving other alternatives. One piece of research said that an individual experiencing suicidal ideation is likely to be experiencing 3 beliefs about their situation: that it is intolerable, they cannot bear this level of distress; that it is inescapable, they cannot see a way to escape from the pain; and it is interminable, there is no obvious end to this pain. And what those 3 beliefs do together is create this overwhelming sense of hopelessness and helplessness. And suicide is then perceived as the only way of escaping this place. Well, I've said we're about planting seeds of hope. And what hope does is challenge these fundamental beliefs. It offers alternatives. There is another way forward. And how do we do that? How do we persuade someone that there is another way forward? Well, persuasion always begins in the context of a positive relationship. And so you're on the path to creating that simply by being there with that person and having shown that you have heard them and that you are listening and that you care. The second thing is that we persuade not so much by talking, but by listening. And so we encourage a person to tell the story of what's going on for them at this moment in their life. Be calm. Give them your full attention. Don't interrupt. Don't give advice. Don't pass judgment. You're just trying to show that you care and you take them seriously and you want them to live. And I think if you've done that, when it comes to offering an alternative, that alternative will quite likely be accepted. Again, the studies show us that a suicidal crisis, that is the period of time from making a decision to acting on it, lasts somewhere between 5 minutes and 1 hour. And so if we can just spend an hour being present and listening as they tell their story and encouraging them to keep on talking, the immediate crisis is going to pass. Heightened states of emotion will lower. The ability to think clearly will improve. And a person is then more likely to become open to accepting help. If they are resistant, just keep on talking, keep on listening. And that could be enough to save their life. In the end, I think we just want them to be able to say yes to a simple question. Will you come with me to get some help? Will you let me get you some help? And if it's not possible to access that straight away, what can we do to keep you safe right now? That, to me, is persuasion. Your willingness to listen and to help can kindle hope and make all the difference. Core skill number 2, persuade. Final one, and I'm almost at the end, is to refer. If someone says yes to that question, will you come with me to get some help? Will you let me get you some help? We actually have to capitalise on that moment and refer them to the professional help that they need. And this is core skill number 3. It begins with that verbal agreement to accept help. But the reality is that a person at this place may also not have the emotional energy, the cognitive capacity to be able to access that help for themselves. And I'm going to be quite honest, the system will also be reluctant to help. And so they need someone on their side to fight for them. And that's what this last skill is all about, being the one who fights for their well-being. Can I say that the very best referral is hand-delivered? It involves taking them to a professional who can give them the help that they need. It might be a local GP. It might be the emergency department at the local hospital. But it's about actually taking them and handing them over to a professional who can help. If it's not possible to access someone in that way, can I say that there are all sorts of phone resources and online resources that are beneficial. Lifeline, the suicide callback service, our own internal member assistance program. And I have sat with one person and actually rang the member assistance program, talked to them, explained the situation, and then handed the phone to a person who was there with me and just let that conversation go on. The member assistance program did the follow-up. They were in touch with the help that they needed. And of course, don't forget Triple O. An ambulance will come. Paramedics are trained in providing help. And what I've actually done is create a contact on my phone simply called suicide. And in it, I've listed all the important numbers that I think I might need, and I've saved it as a favourite on my phone, so I find it very easy to access any of these resources if I need them. So the very best referral is simply to put someone in direct contact with the person who can help. Second best referral is to get a commitment from this person to accept help and then make some arrangements for them to access that help. It might simply be that it's not possible at that moment in time for them to head off to a doctor or to the emergency department. But to jump on the phone and make an appointment and to be there so you overhear the details and therefore are able to follow up to see if they kept the appointment is a valuable thing. If there's some reason they can't go just now, I could say, well, perhaps I'll come back this afternoon at 3 o'clock and we can go then. But it's still about making the connection and encourage them to access that help. I guess the third best referral is to give a person the information they need and try and get a good faith commitment out of them that they will not attempt or complete suicide. But what I will say is that any willingness to accept help, even if it's not at the present moment, but at some point in the future, is still a good outcome. Since almost all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of attempt suicide will be met with agreement and relief, we should never hesitate to jump in and get involved. A few general observations. Don't go it alone. Get other people to help. You can ask a person who's been considering suicide, is there someone I can get to be with you, a member of a family, a friend, a pastor, a doctor? And having got them connected with help, a follow-up visit, phone call, whatever feels comfortable to you is invaluable because it lets them know that you do genuinely care what happens to them. And it's the caring that can help save a life. When we apply QPR, question, persuade, refer, we are planting the seeds of hope, and hope prevents suicide. A recap. What we're on about is watching each other's backs. And the threat we are most concerned about here is the threat posed by suicide. But I will say that sometimes it turns out that the problem isn't that they are suicidal, but there are other issues, other big needs in their life, and this process still opens the door to people getting the help that they might need for those other issues. Having sat and listened to me for half an hour, you actually know more now than most people about the signs or clues, verbal, behavioural and situational, that could indicate that someone is at risk of self-harm, and you know something about the options for help that are available. I've introduced you to 3 core skills to enable you to move from recognising a warning sign to connecting a potentially suicidal person with the help that they need. In other words, you can ask a question to clarify their intentions. You can persuade, that is, get their verbal agreement to accept some help, and you know how to refer or put them in touch with a professional who can give them the help that they need. And it's knowing these 3 things that can save lives. And I hope after today you would actually feel a greater confidence to take some form of positive action if the situation presents itself to help, because helping is what will save lives. I've done it with 54 seconds to spare, so thank you very much for your time. If you want to get in touch and find out more about this, or there's some way that I can help you in your own area, and a number of other brigades have asked for help in this respect, feel free just to get in touch and I will do my best to provide you with assistance.